order. I'd like to welcome everyone here today for this very timely hearing on the Department of Defense Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Policy and Programs for fiscal year 2018. The pursuit and potential use of weapons of mass destruction remains a high-consequence threat to our national security. To date, the Department of Defense efforts to prevent, protect against, and respond to weapons of mass destruction threats have kept the use of these weapons low. Despite these efforts, recent media reports of chemical weapons use in Iraq and Syria, continued nuclear weapons development in North Korea, and the asymmetric use of nerve agent remind us the threat is real, global in nature, and potentially growing. A key challenge in countering this threat is that many technologies that are used for peaceful civilian purposes can also potentially be used for developing weapons of mass destruction. Emerging examples of these dual-use technologies are in the fields of synthetic biology and gene editing. Rapidly developing biotechnologies that are easily obtained present new threats to the warfighter that we have yet to fully understand. Today's hearing will allow our subcommittee to provide critical oversight on ensuring that the Department's countering weapons of mass destruction policies, plans, and programs sufficiently address these emerging threats. Let me now turn to Ranking Member Jim Langevin of Rhode Island for any opening comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Dr. Hopkins and Mr. Vega, it's very nice to see you here, and Mr. Rand, great to be with you for the first time, so thank you. Before I give the rest of my opening statement, though, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge Ms. Katie Sutton, a Sandia National Laboratory Fellow that has been on HASC for the last 2 years. Katie returns to Sandia to work on cyber programs next week. During her tenure on HASC, Katie's been a tremendous asset and has worked in a bipartisan fashion, particularly on CWMD issues. She has many accomplishments to be proud of, such as the Biodefense Strategy provision in the fiscal year 2017 NDAA, on which she was the lead. Katie, I just want to say thank you for all your hard work on behalf of the ETC subcommittee and wish you well.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Well, today, we meet to review the efforts by the Department of Defense to address the threat of weapons of mass destruction. This is an important topic for oversight by the subcommittee, and I look forward to hearing about the policies and programs at the Department of Defense to counter this threat. During this past year, we've continued to receive media reports of the use of these weapons, including the use of chemical weapons by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and the use of VX, a nerve agent, by North Korea. These reports illustrate the importance of robust efforts to protect the services and the nation from this continually evolving threat. Last fall, the agency formerly known as the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Agency, or JIADA, was transitioned to the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization, JIATO, within the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. This change offers the opportunity to achieve savings through common efficiencies and to leverage synergy in the organization's missions. Efficiencies and synergy include streamlining the command structure of JIATO to align with DTRA, consolidating human resources and other overhead functions, and reducing mission and program overlap in order to focus JIATO on its core task and to avoid mission creep. It's important that we continue to evaluate the Department's programs and efforts to ensure they're efficiently and effectively meeting the requirements of our warfighters. Over the last few years, we've been briefed by the Department on Constellation, a prototype of a new CWMD situational awareness technology. I certainly look forward to hearing what efforts the Department has been taking to work with Special Operations Command, which has recently taken over the mission for global synchronization for countering weapons of mass destruction, to understand the requirements of the commander and leverage any existing systems to meet these needs. Finally, the confluence of the fiscal year 2017 end-of-year appropriations, fiscal year 27 supplemental request, and fiscal year 2018 budget outline have no doubt created challenges in executing and planning programs. So I'd like to ask our witnesses to talk about the day-to-day challenges of uncertainty and their priorities on all three of these funding mechanisms. With that, I thank you again to our witnesses for appearing before us today. And Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
We have before us a panel of 3 distinguished witnesses: Dr. Arthur Hopkins, Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs; Mr. Peter Verga, performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security; and Ms. Sherry Durand, Acting Director of DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. While detailed budget numbers for fiscal year 2018 are not available at this time, we look forward to a robust discussion on the policies and programs in place in the Department for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction in 2018. Welcome to all of our witnesses. I'd like to remind you that your testimony will be included in the record, and we ask that you summarize key points from that testimony in 5 minutes or less. And before we begin with Dr. Hopkins, I also would like to take a moment to recognize Katie Sutton, who will be returning to Sandia National Laboratories, having completed her 2-year fellowship with our committee. Katie has been an integral part of our team and helped us legislate and conduct oversight in many important and complex areas. Indeed, many of the same things we plan on discussing today. Katie, thank you for your hard work over the past 2 years, and we wish you continued success. And with that, Dr. Hopkins, we can begin with you, and we look forward to your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate this opportunity to testify on the Department's efforts to counter threats posed by weapons of mass destruction. The Office of the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs has roots that go back to the establishment of the department, when it was focused primarily on nuclear deterrence. Since then, the organization's responsibilities have expanded to include nuclear, chemical, and biological defense programs, which are carried out by 4 organizations within the NCB enterprise. Our Nuclear Matters Office is the focal point for DoD activities and initiatives for sustaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. Our Chemical and Biological Defense Program develops capabilities that enable warfighters to deter, prevent, protect, mitigate, respond to, and recover from traditional and emerging threats. Through our Threat Reduction and Arms Control Office, our oversight of the nation's chemical demilitarization program focuses on the safe, complete, and treaty-compliant destruction of the nation's remaining chemical weapons stockpile. In addition, we ensure DoD compliance with nuclear, chemical, and biological treaties and agreements. And our Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Systems program strengthens situational awareness of global WMD activities. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency addresses the full spectrum of WMD-related threats, including cooperative threat reduction programs and support to combat commands, as well as threats from improvised devices. Today, I'd like to highlight some of the enduring and the emerging challenges and threats in each area, the ongoing activities that we're conducting to address those challenges, and our priorities moving forward. To counter current and emerging threats like those enabled by synthetic biology and non-traditional agents, the Chemical and Biological Defense Program is developing new strategies to anticipate, prepare, and more rapidly respond, especially in the area of medical countermeasures, in addition to developing protective equipment and detection systems. In domestic chemical demilitarization, the Department continues to make significant progress in meeting the nation's commitments under the Chemical Weapons Convention by working toward eliminating the last of our remaining chemical weapons stockpiles in Colorado and Kentucky. In September 16, the Department started agent destruction operations at the Pueblo, Colorado site. At Bluegrass, Kentucky, facility construction is complete and destruction systems are being tested. With the United States Special Operations Command's new leadership role in countering weapons of mass destruction mission, we've engaged closely with them to understand their mission needs for global situational awareness. WMD threat reduction programs executed by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency continue to reduce the threat of weapons of mass destruction around the world by detecting and preventing proliferation and consolidating, securing, and eliminating dangerous pathogens and materials of concern. These efforts are conducted in cooperation with partners throughout the world as they enhance their own capacity to secure WMD materials, detect and interdict proliferation, and respond to WMD-related events. WMD threats are real. The Department's activities to help reduce these threats include the full spectrum of countering weapons of mass destruction activities, from preventing acquisition to containing and reducing threats to supporting crisis response. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify, and also thank you for your enduring interest and support to these important mission areas.
Thank you, Mr. Verga.
Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, members of the committee, again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm honored to be here with Dr. Hopkins and Ms. Duran to present the department's approach to countering chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Since the department testified before the subcommittee on this subject 1 year ago, 2 CBRN-related threats have dominated the headlines. Those posed by North Korea and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. Both highlight the complex nature of the threat we face. The North Korean regime has increased its dangerous and provocative CBRN-related activities over the past year. It's continued to test nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles in clear violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. ISIS poses a different sort of CBRN threat as a non-state actor, not bound by long-standing norms and laws, and with a demonstrated willingness to use chemical weapons against civilians and combatants alike. While ISIS capabilities are currently far less sophisticated than North Korea's, its willingness to use and potentially proliferate CBRN-related materials or knowledge to its affiliates elsewhere is of grave concern. The department's strategic approach to countering these threats focuses on 3 lines of effort: preventing acquisition of WMD, containing and reducing threats, and mitigating the consequences of potential use. Our efforts to address these threats for North Korea and ISIS reflect this approach. To prevent the transfer of CBRN or dual-use materials to and from North Korea, the department works closely with interagency partners, in part through outreach under the Proliferation Security Initiative, or PSI, to the 104 other PSI endorsees committed to preventing WMD proliferation. Partnership with committed allies and partners are foundational to our success. We also engage with partners through the DoD Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which remains, in the words of Secretary of Defense Mattis, the department's most comprehensive and effective tool for working cooperatively with partners to mitigate CBRN-related threats. Through DTRS-capable implementation, CTR is engaged in over 30 countries, helping them detect, secure, or eliminate CBRN-related materials and pathogens of security concern. These efforts are integrated with those of our interagency partners. In Southeast Asia, CTR is building the capabilities of our partners to detect and prevent maritime proliferation of CBRN-related materials, such as those headed to or from North Korea. Despite our best efforts at prevention, we must be prepared to contain and reduce CBRN threats once they have developed. For instance, to contain and reduce the CBRN threats from ISIS, the U.S. and our coalition partners are also exploiting opportunities on the ground to better understand and disrupt their CW networks. The DoD CTR program is also strengthening Jordan's and Lebanon's capacity to prevent proliferation of CBRN materials from Iraq and Syria into their territories, and to ensure that ISIS affiliates in Libya do not acquire or proliferate a CBRN capability. We supported interagency efforts to remove chemical precursors from Libya and initiated a proliferation prevention program with the government of Tunisia along its border with Libya. Elsewhere, DoD is working with our key regional allies, the Republic of Korea and Japan, to ensure that our focus remains postured to respond to CBRN contingencies or emanating from the Korean Peninsula. Complementing those engagements in the CBRN Preparedness Program, or CP2, which engages bilaterally with our partner nations to respond to and mitigate effects of a CBRN incident. In addition to being prepared to respond to events overseas, DoD must ensure we are prepared to support the federal response to a domestic CBRN incident at home. Working closely with the Joint Staff, we continue to partner with a wide array of interagency partners, including the Departments of Homeland Security, Energy, and Justice, to ensure a coordinated response to any event in the homeland. In conclusion, the acquisition or use of CBRN weapons against the United States, our forces, or our interests remains among the most dangerous threats we face. With your support, the Department will continue to strengthen our capabilities and relationships to reduce these threats at home and abroad. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rand.
Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to be here today to share with you the work of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. DTRA makes the United States and our allies safer by countering threats posed by the proliferation and use of weapons of mass destruction. While not a direct focus of today's hearing, DTRA also has a new mission area, countering improvised explosive devices and other improvised threats. Last October, the Department transitioned the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization, JIDO, under the authority, direction, and control of DTRA. DTRA is a unique organization with a broad portfolio that is accomplished by an incredibly capable and talented workforce. We are very proud of some recent milestones, including the accomplishments of the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which celebrated its 25th anniversary last December. And this coming April, we will celebrate the 70th anniversary of DTRA's Defense Nuclear Weapons School located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our expertise spans the full spectrum of WMD threats: chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, and high-yield explosives. We are a one-stop shop, open 24 hours a day to support the Department's functional and geographic combatant commands, the military services, and the interagency. Over the past 3 years, DTRA moved to a regional vice programmatic approach against WMD threats. This allows us to support warfighters and allies with more comprehensive and integrated methods that are better aligned with the combatant commands. Likewise, our regional approach ensures a more holistic prioritization of the science and technology that DTRA pursues and a better understanding of how we transition those capabilities to the warfighter and military services. In Iraq and Syria, ISIS is using chemical weapons on the battlefield. Thankfully, the authorities and funding that Congress provides DTRA each year allows us to support Operation Inherent Resolve and respond to these and other emerging long-term WMD challenges. I am proud of what our team has accomplished this past year and believe that we serve as good stewards of taxpayers' dollars. As we look toward fiscal year 2018, I am confident that we are prepared to address future WMD and improvised threats around the world. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Durand. My first question is, the FY17 NDAA authorized funding for many critical activities within the Chemical and Biological Defense Program, the Chemical Demilitarization Program, and at DTRA. What have been the impacts of the continuing resolution, the CR, so far this fiscal year? And can you describe the impacts to your programs for a full year CR for fiscal year 2017? Dr. Hopkins.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the question. We are making it work because it is the reality of the budget situation, but the continuing resolution really limits our ability to do longer-term planning because of the way the funds come in increments. And so I would say that the nature of the people who do the work for us is such that they will make the programs work given the constraints. However, it does limit our ability to plan and adapt, especially if things come up in near term and medium term that require different levels of funding. The continuing resolution doesn't allow that. So it does tie our hands a bit.
Mr. Verga?
I would just go along with what Dr. Hopkins said. It's obviously always better to have a full year budget appropriation because it does allow you to implement a program that you've laid out in an orderly fashion. Given what you expected to get in the appropriations that were asked for in the budget, and a CR, it just trips you up when you get started and you can't really do what you need to do.
And Ms. Durand.
Give you a couple of specifics from an agency perspective. One, it more than doubles our workload. When you do incremental funding, as the CR funding comes in, we're having to incrementally fund all of our contracts. So that means for the contracting staff, who is already overworked, they are in essence doubling their work throughout the year. That also adds to our comptroller support office, who are also having to do a lot of accounting and other budgetary actions when the department is working very hard towards our financial improvement and audit readiness. So it's just, part of that is just a workload capacity. As Dr. Hopkins said, we will get it done. But at a time when we need everybody more focused on direct mission support, that makes it difficult. For us specifically, another one that we encountered when JIDO came under us, one of the things we didn't expect was in the 16 budget was with the Army, because the Army was the executive agent for JIDA. Because of the continuing resolution, that funding was appropriated to the Army, and it did not come directly to DTRA. So again, that means the accounting and the budgetary means it has to go on. If the money goes to the Army, we have to get it from the Army. We have to do double budgeting and a lot of budgetary transfers in our book. So it just makes it very complicated.
Thank you very much. It's important for us to get on the record the negative impacts that a continued CR would have on the DoD, so thank you for those thoughtful answers. My second question is for Dr. Hopkins. Recent technological advances in the areas of synthetic biology and gene editing have created a biorevolution that has increased the capability and availability of biotechnology. Last fall, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology released a report on this topic that concluded, quote, just as rapid advances in biotechnology have increased the risk of misuse by bad actors, they have expanded the tools available to protect the public. How is the DoD responding to the emerging threat faced by these new technologies, and can the department apply these new technologies to counter the potential threat?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the question. You're absolutely right. This is, the new technologies really are a double-edged sword. One of the challenges we have is in looking at the potential effects on national security. We want to make sure that the things that we do to try to protect ourselves don't interfere with the development of the application of the technology for peaceful, useful purposes. And so that, combined with the fact that it is an emerging area, really causes us to step back and try to understand what could be the potential national security impacts of synthetic biology. We have asked the National Academy of Sciences to step in and help us in an interagency study to look at the potential impacts on security. About what time frame would we expect potential nefarious capabilities to be available to bad actors, and what can we do about it? And the things that we would do about it really fall into at least three areas. The ability to know what's happening in the first place, because if we're talking about a biological threat, how do you know what it is? How do you know it's appeared? And so we're working very hard on detection technologies to understand when and if we may be subject to those kinds of attacks. Protection is a second area. As you know, the classic chemical biological protection is a mask, a suit, a glove, an individual protection, collective protection, that sort of thing. We have to make sure that our science base is up to the task and actually developing capabilities to protect the warfighter. And so challenging the things that we have on hand now that are classical in the face of those kinds of threats is very important. Third area is mitigation. What are we going to do about it? And since we're talking about biological side of things, medical countermeasure development is right at the forefront. The same tools, synthetic biology, that we're concerned about as being capable of being used against us, we are also using in the laboratories to help to develop countermeasures. And so our ability to come up with vaccines, therapeutics, even laboratory equipment that will help identify what the threat is, very important to us. And so those three areas, detection, protection, and medical countermeasures for mitigation are the places where we are investing to try to counter that.
Thank you, Dr. Hopkins. I now recognize Mr. Langevin.
Again, thank you, our witnesses, again, for being here. Ms. Durand, if I could start with you. JIDO was an organization that continually evolved and had an uncertain future. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the alignment of JIDO under DTRA should result in both synergy and efficiencies, as well as provide an opportunity to focus JIDO on its core mission and define its future. So I wanted to know what synergies are there between DTRA and JIDO, what efficiencies have been achieved as a result of the realignment, and how is the department using the alignment as an opportunity to focus JIDO on its core mission and to size and scope the organization for that mission to achieve maximum effectiveness? And finally, has the term improvised threat been defined? So if you want to repeat any of those, I threw a lot at you, I'd be glad to. So.
Thank you for those questions. 2 weeks ago, we briefed the staffers on highlighting all the efficiencies that we have gained since JIDO came under us. I would preface all my comments with, it really has only been since October. So we spent, after the decision was made last January, up until October when they officially came under us, spending a lot of time getting everything ready to come under us. That was an enormous challenge, just getting 235 JIDO civilian employees transferred from the Army into DTRA. One of the first things that we did is we have consolidated 8 of the offices that were previously in JIDO. Those are the ones that you touched on: Human Resources, Inspector General, Contracts, Comptroller, General Counsel, Legislative and Public Affairs, Security and Counterintelligence. JIDA at the time was standing up to be its own defense agency, so those offices were standing up. So we just took those offices and those individuals and merged them into ours. And so we're moving forward with, they have entirely new systems that they have to learn. So we're spending a lot of time getting them up to speed. You had mentioned in your opening comments about the senior structure. So JIDO previously had 4 senior executive service members. One of those was a term appointment, so that's been, that ended. So we are working on recognizing the need to shrink that senior leadership level down, so we are pushing towards that. The efficiency, so 2 key areas that we're looking at in information technology and our research and development capacities. DTRA has a lot of test bed capacity in our research and development test and evaluation world, and JIDO will be able to use those test ranges, so that will, in time, reduce their costs associated with test range costs. So that's one specific thing. JIDO is very proficient and has a great deal of experience in information technology, especially how it supports the warfighter. So all their efforts that they have spent years developing on situational awareness for improvised threats, on attacking those networks, we're finding to be very helpful to us in the CWMD community. So we are, especially in our IT worlds, they are working very much together to figure out what synergies that are there, what can we combine, what things may need to remain separate. We have also, recognizing the committee's desire to show savings, we are keeping track of those. I cannot sit here and tell you that we have gained a tremendous amount of savings. It takes quite a bit for this type of an integration. There are a lot of upfront costs and time that go into it. But we fully expect over a certain amount of time, and it may take a couple years, that we would be able to come back to you and show you specific metrics and dollar savings. One quick one I would give you is, when JIDO was going to stand up, they were going to have to buy their backroom human resources services. So that's the processing a lot of actions. They would have gained those services from the Defense Logistics Agency, which is a working capital entity. So they would have been paying DLA for that support. So it was about $1.5 million. So that's a cost avoidance that they avoided with that, and now they're just merged in with ours. So we are seeing some savings, but I would expect them to grow over time. To your question on focusing on the mission, so we do think that because they're now under DTRA and they're not having to do all the things related to being a separate entity and a separate agency, they will benefit from all the structure that we have in place already, so they don't have to be bothered with that. To your specific question, is improvised threats defined well? No. You could use the term improvised threats, and that could be everything that goes on within the department. So we're continuing to look at and to make sure that we're following, I think, the guidance the committee has been concerned about before of the mission creep. I hope I addressed each one.
You did. You hit them all. That's very good. Thank you very much. My time's expired. Hopefully we'll get to a second round, but if not, I yield back. Thank you.
Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here today, and very interesting and concerning topic, as you well know. Dr. Hopkins, I want to talk to you for a little bit. I look back at DOD response to the Ebola virus and our engagement there, and I think actually a lot to be proud of with that mission in a challenging situation. I also look at the balance of the Department of Defense or the military to serve in combat roles, and that's not a combat role, but we could be in a combat environment where there's an outbreak of some entity like that we have to be concerned with? And then where does HHS come into play, and how do you see those roles, and do they cooperate? How are we engaging in that way, and what were the lessons learned from that mission?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. I think the success of the defense, chemical biological defense program is very, very much dependent on how well we coordinate with the other government stakeholders in this area, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, CDC, National Institutes of Health, Agriculture. I mean, there are a number of government agencies, all of whom have a stake in this area. Our focus is on biological threat agents, and so in order to make sure that the warfighter has the therapeutics and the diagnostics and the capabilities to know that they're under attack and even protect them with vaccines, that's I don't want to call it a niche, but that's a very important part. That's a lead part of what we do. Having said that, the science associated with developing those countermeasures, as well as the coordination on the basic science for this, is something that we have to share. And I think that happens very effectively through a group called FEMC, the Public Health Emergency Medical Countermeasures Enterprise. It's all the agencies that I just mentioned, all coming together primarily for the purpose of making sure that the nation has of therapeutics and vaccines in the event of a natural outbreak, but we also leverage that capability to make sure that the department has what it needs. As far as lessons learned from the Ebola outbreak, to me, the single largest lesson is that the department has a lot to offer. While we may not have the lead in a natural outbreak, the department has quite a capability that we can leverage and we can contribute to natural outbreaks like that. Again, going back to the original, my original point, the number one lesson we learned is it's really, really important to be talking to and collaborating with the other government agencies who have a stake in the successful outcome of events like those.
In that particular situation, you know, you don't know these outbreaks are coming. These are new viruses. I'm just curious how the military trains for that mission. I guess it's more generic training and education as you roll out, I would imagine. Would that be the case?
I think it's actually that, but it's also the military laboratories, the Navy laboratories, the Army laboratories are always forward-looking, and they're always coordinating with the civilian side to make sure that the military has the situational awareness and knows what capabilities are out there, our own and on the civilian side. So again, I think it comes down to the collaboration and the situational awareness that's provided by the leading-edge researchers and developers at the service laboratories.
And the coordination has been good in your opinion?
Yes, it has been.
Thank you. Mr. Ant, if I could ask you real quickly, in the intelligence community, how's the cooperation between intelligence community and with what's going on? We'd always hate to hear that there wasn't conversation back and forth. Do you feel like there are any gaps there that we need to address? Should Congress be helping in any way in that regard?
I will tell you that DTRA enjoys an incredibly strong partnership across the entire intelligence community. I would also tell you that in the very short time that U.S. SOCOM has had the synchronization mission, they are so interwoven with the entire intelligence community. General Thomas in particular is very actively going after this in terms of what else does he need from the intelligence community for the CWMD mission. And I have no doubt he will make great strides in that regard. We've also experienced in some recent exercises that some of my folks have participated in. The feedback that I get from them is that they have never seen a time when there was more involvement and better partnership with across the entire interagency, with our allies, and with the intelligence community. So I can't tell you that I see any gap. I can give you the assurance that if there is one, General Thomas will find it and he will correct it.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you very much. Prior to the first Gulf War, it was disclosed that Iraq had produced 19,000 liters of concentrated botulin A toxin to be used in weapons. Given that one aerosolized gram of this toxin could potentially kill up to 1 million people, where would DTRA rank this toxin in terms of threat level where we are today?
So that one, I'm not sure, so I'd like to take that one for the record and get back to you, so I give you the correct answer.
Sure, I appreciate it. As you go through that follow-up, I'd be interested to see if there are any current programs or plans underway that recognize this threat and countermeasures to deal with it. Given that the FDA approval process for medical countermeasures can be lengthy and unpredictable, what kind of risk does that present to the DoD in wait times for FDA approvals for any countermeasures that we may need in a tighter timeline? Generally, not specifically for this toxin, but generally.
So I'm going to, DTRA is not specifically involved in that piece of the process. I would defer to Dr. Hopkins on any
Sure.
of those specifics.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say that the FDA approval process is critically important and to the successful production of vaccines and therapeutics that we need. And so having said that, we are doing everything we can to work with the FDA, starting early in the process. We've learned over the years that it's best to engage with the Food and Drug Administration very, very early so that we can understand the process as well as work with them in speeding things up. We also, through the passing of the Cures Act, we in the department have authority now to offer priority review vouchers and obtain orphan drug designations for some of our low volume, limited distribution kind of products. And so that is very, very helpful to us. In fact, most recently, the plague vaccine has received FDA orphan drug status, and that was funded by the Chem Biodefense Program. So the bottom line is we are using whatever means we can to accelerate and work very closely and early with the Food and Drug Administration because we know that their involvement is important to the production of safe products.
Understood. Thank you. I yield back.
Dr. Abraham.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank the witnesses for being here. This is a vital topic, in my opinion. And Mr. Berger, thank you for your service in Vietnam. We appreciate that very much, sir. I'm going to pony a little bit off Dr. Winstrup and Chairwoman Stefanik and go back to the synthetic biology of all this nuclear, chemical, and biological things that do keep me awake at night. I think the biological is the one that I spend most of the time looking at the ceiling because it's cheap, it's available, and as Dr. Winstrup alluded to, you could have a human vector to transmit the pathogen. And to weaponize a virus or a bacteria with what you gentlemen know of, certainly you, Dr. Hopkins, with the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, the genetic engineering, which can be done now in any biochemical lab with a person of just normal intelligence that has a master's or certainly a PhD in that type of instance, this can become a real threat very quickly. My question, Dr. Hopkins, to you first. You said you were, and I understand, talking to state governments and the people in those agencies that we need to talk to. But we all know that if a terrorist organization wants to do this, we're not talking to them. Are there any, and I understand it's difficult, but are there any checks and balances today that at least can give us a little hint of something that may be coming? Because as Ms. Gabbard said with the botulism, mitigation is not an option here because we're too far behind the power curve. So the question is, what's out there to stop this? And what can we as Congress do to help you accomplish that goal?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The short answer is I'm not aware of a specific action or
and I'm not either. That's why I asked the question. I'm not aware of any either.
But I think what that does is it really points to the importance of this study that we've commissioned with the National Academy of Sciences, because as you and I think about this, we would both conjure up notions of some really bad things that could happen in the hands of people who don't need a lot of training or a lot of equipment.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It's here.
It does. What we've asked the Academy to do is kind of separate the science fiction from the reality and recognize what reality is today and help us to understand the national security implications. What is the art of the possible in the near term, in the midterm, and the long term, as well as to identify what can we do about it. We know that the first step is detection. We know that, first of all, we've got to know we're under attack. And so we know that the laboratories are already thinking about ways they might be able to, that we could detect a genetically modified version of some disease. So that's the starting point, and we're already working on that. But I really think the key to framing the whole potential threat is the National Academy, the national experts, thinking through this with the assembly of the various stakeholders, Health and Human Services and Homeland Security and so forth, and Department of Defense, so that we can wrap our arms around it.
Mr. Rand, anything we can do in Congress to help you guys out?
Not that I can think of right now. I would tell you that that in the ChemBio S&T world for science and technology, one of our top priorities is finding an integrated early warning system and process to do just what Dr. Hopkins had talked about, because just finding what is out there and knowing it's coming is critical. So I would expect our work would progress in that area.
Anything to add, Mr. Berger?
Nothing other than just, I think the recognition of the problem is the first step towards, towards dealing with it, and I think it's important
I think we recognize it for
Yes,
sure.
sir.
It's at that. Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. I yield back.
Mr. Vesey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question I wanted to ask you. I know that on this committee that we've been closely monitoring military readiness levels, and I'd like to hear your assessment of our current readiness levels dealing with chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear equipment, and personnel across the DoD and other agencies. And any of you can answer that.
Thank you, Congressman. For the traditional agents and threats that we've been mustard, nerve, chemicals, the known biological systems, I believe that the investments that the department's been making for decades in masks, suits, gloves, individual protection, collective protection, and all of those areas have provided a certain degree of readiness, an adequate degree of readiness for encountering those classical agents. In the area of emerging threats, emerging infectious diseases, synthetic biology, engineered diseases, I don't think we know how good we are or how bad we are, and that's an area that where we are focusing, and we have to continue to focus.
Also, wanted to switch to Middle East and North Africa. I wanted to ask if you could discuss how the current events there are impacting DTRA's operations and planning, and have you received any additional requests for support from CENTCOM and AFRICOM, and what are some of your largest concerns there?
So obviously, as the military campaign against ISIS continues in Iraq and Syria, ISIS is regrouping, specifically in those areas of the Middle East and North Africa. DTRA works with partner countries in those regions to help contain and reduce those threats from terrorists that are obtaining WMD materials that could certainly destabilize those regions and lead to large refugee flows. In countries where there's active ongoing violence, such as in Iraq, our CTR operations have been curtailed significantly. And our engagements have been limited to VTC instead of being able to go there in person. In countries where violence is sporadic and the security situation is delicate, such as in Lebanon and Jordan, our CTR operations have continued to provide the security environment. That environment is stable enough for our operations, but we've encountered delays, but they've been short in duration. In essence, our work there has been limited because we're always focused on the safety of our people before we send them over there, and so that limits us of what we can do.
Well, thank you very much. And wanted to also ask one more question related to Ebola. We had one of the more high-profile cases in Dallas County, which is an area that I represent, and wanted to know what lessons that you feel that we've learned that have been put into practice, and how would you assess the DoD's ability to respond similarly in future cases?
I'll comment on that. On that. First thing, I think what DoD brings to a situation like the Ebola outbreak is our, pardon me, our organizational ability, our planning ability, our logistics, and those sorts of things. I think we learned from the Ebola outbreak the necessity of having the capacity to transport folks. We made an investment in some the patient transportable pods that could be put into our military medical evacuation aircraft to do things like that. But I think the primary thing is early detection. I think the earlier we can recognize that is what the problem is, and the earlier we can get ahead of the curve on trying to deal with the problem is probably where we're at. And so I think our efforts in early detection and warning of outbreaks is probably where our best investment can be made.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik. And thank each of you for being here today and on these important issues. And indeed, our subcommittee has been very fortunate to have Sandia fellow Katie Sutton here. In fact, she brings good news and bad news. Last year, she brought bad news, but it needed to be addressed, and her professionalism has certainly come through. Last year, we had the mishandling of the live anthrax samples that were sent from Dugway to 86 government and private labs and other facilities in the United States and 7 other countries: Australia, Britain, Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, and South Korea. Mr. Berger, what is the status of the report requested in FY17 NDAA regarding the mishandling of the anthrax shipments? What is the status of any corrective actions that have been put in place to make sure this type of incident is prevented in the future? And what efforts are being taken within the department to reduce the amount of select agent number of labs that handle select agents? And this could be answered really by anyone, but if you would begin.
I'm afraid I would have to get back to you on that because I don't know the details, but I will provide that to you.
Ms. Duran, Dr. Hopkins.
On the status of the report, I'll have to get that answer for you. If I could take that for the record, we'll get that status. As far as what the department's done, we recognized as a result of those inadvertent shipments that the handling of those agents was being done in different chains of command, and there was not unity of effort or unity of oversight over the years. And so one of the things, I think the most significant thing that the Deputy Secretary did is he designated the Secretary of the Army as the executive agent for all work with biological select agents, and that has had a unifying effect, and it has had introduced a certain amount of discipline into the process. They're responsible for reviewing and inspecting all of the laboratories that handle biological select agents and toxins. And they've also looked outside themselves. They've gone to establish an expert panel to review the procedures, such as the ones that didn't work at Dugway. And so I think we're in much better shape than we were 2 years ago on this, primarily because of that action. There have been a number of actions below that in order to introduce more discipline and care at the laboratory level. But I think the most significant thing was establishing the Secretary of the Army as the department's executive agent for overseeing all work with those select agents.
I have nothing further to add.
And again, Katie Sutton was just terrific, bringing this to our attention, monitoring this. Her professionalism always comes through, and we're going to miss her as she departs for another great assignment. Additionally, for Ms. Duran, Dr. Hopkins, the FY17 supplemental budget request included a supplemental increase of $127 million for the chemical demilitarization program due to engineering challenges and increased contract cost. Can you explain the justification for this additional request? What is the impact if this funding is not received? Will the program be able to complete all required destruction by the 2023 deadline? What mitigation steps are being put in place for this program to prevent further cost and schedule overruns?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Just for some context on this, the chemical demilitarization program in the United States is working on eliminating the last 10% of what the United States declared to the Chemical Weapons Convention. That would be, we declared 30,000 tons several years ago, and this Assembled Chemical Weapons Alternatives Program is the program that it has the two sites, one in Kentucky, one in Colorado. And there has been major progress at both of those sites. In Pueblo, they've started operations, and Bluegrass, they're going through systemization. There is a request in the supplemental for additional resources, and that is primarily to recover some schedule in order to make sure that we make the 2023. And it actually, in large-scale processes like these, the more we can invest up front, the higher the likelihood is that it's going to reduce the life cycle cost for this. The need for the increase was really due to a number of factors. Primarily, we did not anticipate the fact that the first-of-a-kind technologies that are being used at both locations would require so much rework. I could go into gory detail on some of the things like redoing welds and so forth, but in both cases, in both Pueblo and in Bluegrass, there has been unexpected, unplanned need for some additional rework in order to get the systems up and running. And when I say we didn't anticipate, I can be very specific. We didn't anticipate last year, because last year, in an attempt to reduce the amount of money that the program carried over from one year to another, the Aqua program gave money back, returned money so that it could be rephased in the out years. And so as a result, at the same time we're returning the money so that it can be rephased in later years, the need for this rework, the emerging challenges also appeared, and that resulted in an actual need for the money in 17. So what we're essentially trying to do is put back into 17 that we had reprogrammed into the out years in order to make sure that we make the 2023 schedule.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you very much to our witnesses for being here today. I wanted to dig a little deeper in terms of what we're doing to protect our warfighters, and in particular, the extent to which we're facing increasing threats on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Mr. Verga, maybe we could start with you, just in terms of the assurances that you feel, the confidence that you feel that we're in a position where we're providing our men and women in uniform with the very best possible protection against the growing threat that they may be facing on the battlefield from these types of weapons.
Well, we have a great deal of confidence in the equipment and the training that our forces have in order to deal with these threats. I mean, it's one that we've recognized over time, made significant investments in our ability to counter those threats, and are, excuse me, are now working with our partners and allies in the area to in fact provide to the allies, to the Iraqis and to the Kurds, equipment through cooperative programs that Ditra and Dr. Hopkinson speak to a little bit more in detail to be able to deal with those. Again, I think it's the importance is recognizing the threat. I mean, the ISIS has in fact used both chemical weapons and toxic industrial chemicals in, against our forces and against our allied forces there. I don't know if you had any.
Thank you. In addition, we are making sure that our laboratories, such as Edgewood and Maryland, where they actually do challenge our ability to protect the warfighter with masks and suits and gloves. We're making sure that the things that we're giving the warfighters are effective against what we believe to be the actual materials that are being used in the field.
Just add a little bit more, and Ditra's specific role in the science piece of that, our chemical and biological folks get a lot of feedback from the Joint Program Office on how the development that we did, how that's actually working. Another great program that we have is a Scientists in the Foxhole program, and we take our scientists who are working on the initial phases of developing that equipment that will give the best protection to the warfighter. We send those scientists out into the field with the warfighter so they can get that immediate feedback, and that helps them tremendously in understanding as they're doing the research and the scientific work what they need to, what works for the warfighter and what doesn't. So that's proven to be very successful.
And just to follow up, in terms of the increasing capabilities that we're facing from our adversaries in these areas, could you provide a little bit of information about the extent to which our technology and ability to defend against what we're seeing and the increasing availability of some of these weapons, whether you feel that we're keeping up sufficiently in terms of the progress that's being made by our enemy?
My hesitation is I'm trying to think if in an unclassified format we can talk about where we are in that. I think I would prefer to defer that because we couldn't get into any real specifics.
All right, that's fine. Thank you. And then I just wanted to follow up on where we are on the National Biodefense implementation and strategy. I know you're going to be coming back to us in September of this year. But if you could talk a little bit about sort of the preliminary work that's been done and you know, how you think things are going based on the requirement in the last NDAA.
Thank you. Of course, the Department of Homeland Security is leading that review. We in the Department of Defense are cooperating with them, along with HHS and Department of Agriculture and many other organizations. We did provide a briefing to staff on where we're at on it, and as you said, the report is due in September, and we'll be able to deliver that on time.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam, gentlemen, thank you for your service to the country. And my question gets back to our interaction with other countries that we may not necessarily share values with, but we share interest with. Obviously, the country of Russia comes to mind. Russia and the United States were key to the getting Syria to destroy their chemical weapons. How much dialogue do you have with counterparts in other countries about what the most pressing threats are and the most efficient ways to eliminate those threats?
I would describe the interaction we have with our allies and friends as robust. We have a...
If I may, I'm also talking about people that we don't consider to be allies or friends, but that we may have a shared interest with in this particular field.
Yeah, I'd have to check on that one, sir. I'm sorry, I don't have that right offhand.
I'd be interested in your answer if you think that perhaps that's something that we should pursue. If you would, then go ahead with our allies and friends, if you would.
With our allies, we do have a robust cooperative program with them, cooperative research and development programs, working very closely with, with particularly our NATO allies and also others to be able to share information regarding the threats and regarding the countermeasures. I know Dr. Hopkins can talk a little bit more about some of the specific programs.
Yes, in addition to the sharing information about the potential threats, we have very active, detailed engagements with our closest allies on mitigations and identifying ways to protect us, and especially in the NATO scenario where we have a common standard for the performance of various countermeasures. So it's the closest ally is very strong and very effective, helpful to us.
I would be interested in your comments as well, all of your comments about whether or not this is something that we should look into, how we, whether we should or should not potentially share information with countries where we have that shared interest, if you will, even though we don't share values. I know that the issue with Syria, for example, is one where it took an agreement with Russia to actually get those weapons destroyed. But with that, Madam Chair, I look forward to the written response, and I thank you for your service to the country, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. We'll now go to the second round of questions for members who are able to. My question is a follow-up, Ms. Duran, to Mr. Veazey's line of questioning. And in your testimony, you highlighted DTRA's growing activities in the Middle East and Northern Africa, both in the context of support to Operation Inherent Resolve and the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. But can you discuss how DTRA prioritizes which nations receive support, and how does DTRA leverage other government agencies in these efforts?
I can, thank you. A lot of our priorities come from the two offices that Mr. Verga and Dr. Hopkins represent. So the priorities flow from the Department of Defense down through the Office of the Secretary of Defense. In our own internal planning for our priorities, we have a lot of interaction with the combatant commands, so we get a lot of our priority input from them. We have our own robust strategic planning process within the agency and determining what are the greatest threats, what are those priorities, and then as we build our budgets, we focus on those. But all those are fed through other avenues throughout the department.
And then how does DTRA leverage other government agencies in these efforts?
So that part is critical to us. We have very robust partnerships across the interagency. There are various things that the Department of State does with us related to the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. We'd mentioned before Health and Human Services. They do a lot of work, so we are constantly coordinating and synchronizing and making sure that no one is duplicating efforts. And in essence, it ends up being a leveraging of capabilities across the entire government, so everyone knows where their lanes are and they can focus on those, their specific areas of expertise.
It is clear that there are growing needs of support. And what are your concerns about the growing need for this support?
Support
in the region, just.
Can I take that one for the record?
Absolutely.
On that, thank you.
I will recognize Mr. Langevin for his second round of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thanks to our witnesses. Dr. Hopkins, as you know, for the last 2 years, I have followed the program Constellation. And the program is being resourced by the Office of Secretary of Defense and executed by DTRA to fulfill a STRATCOM requirement. Although I must say it's worth noting, our committee never heard directly from STRATCOM on this particular need or program, which I found curious. But now that the CWMD synchronization role has transferred from STRATCOM to SOCOM, how is the Department clarifying situational awareness requirements of that command?
Thank you for the question. It's especially timely. As you probably could tell from the testimony, we have discontinued the prototype that was called Constellation, primarily due to the limitation of funds that was in the NDAA draft and in the final language. Having said that, though, the requirement for situational awareness is as strong or stronger than it ever has been. The commander of SOCOM has said more than once that he has a very firm, strong need for a common intelligence and common operating pictures, and that is the essence of what situational awareness is, and that's the essence of what the Constellation prototype was intended to provide. Two things are happening. One is your language in the NDAA basically asked us to have an independent look at the system, the requirements, and the plans, and we're doing that. We've hired a federally funded research and development company to go ahead and objectively look at requirements, including the ones that you referenced might have come from STRATCOM at the time, but the requirements for all the combatant commanders for situational awareness of WMD-related things. And our plan is to take the resources that we have and any future resources and work with STRATCOM and work with DTRA and adapt those parts of that where we did learn especially useful things from the Constellation and adapt them to the common intelligence and the common operating picture that SOCOM needs in order to perform their function as the synchronizer. So we're in the process of doing that. We'll get the requirements and the plans, in other words, work with the FFRDC, and then also adapt what we have directly to the needs of the combatant commander.
So how under-resourced were you that you had to, for the program, that you had to cancel it?
Trusting my memory here, about $25 million.
So are you saying that you're coming up with a replacement program, Constellation Light, or is it?
I don't know what we call it yet. We're looking at the requirements, and we're going to work with SOCOM and DTRA to understand what would be the most useful and helpful ways to obtain and depict situational awareness of people, places, and things in the various theaters having to do with weapons of mass destruction. What would be most useful to the warfighter in the field? And what form that takes, I'm not quite sure yet. But we did learn a lot from doing the Constellation. So the plan this year is to use the funds we have to do that, and then recovering next year, and then investing more in those things that are useful to SOCOM.
Okay, well, we know that the requirement hasn't gone away. It's the funding that's the problem. So,
Sir.
Thank you. Mr. Vega, what process is the department using to ensure the transition of necessary resources from STRATCOM to SOCOM for the CWMD mission? Has the hiring freeze impacted the ability of SOCOM or DTRA to bring people into key positions during the transition? And for Ms. Durand, how has the transition been for DTRA? What have been the challenges and opportunities identified? So, Mr. Vega.
To my knowledge, there has not been any issues that have been identified by SOCOM as far as the transition goes. I know they had their initial operational capability in January to do that, and as far as I know, they're moving right along. The normal budgetary process in terms of transferring of resources is the one that we're using. If I could take this opportunity, I may have misspoke when I was talking about ISIS use of chemical weapons. I believe I may have said that they had used them against U.S. forces. That's not true right now. Right now, it's only been Iraqi civilians and Iraqi forces that they have used chemical weapons against, and I'd like to correct that if I could. Thank you.
So for the transition from STRATCOM to SOCOM, I will address how it has impacted DTRA. First, I will say our relationship with SOCOM is tremendous. We've had a long-standing relationship with them, and that has grown even stronger. Last December, General Thomas gathered up the entire interagency and DoD members and got their input for his overall plan, so he learned from that. We had a global synchronization conference last month in bringing in all the interagency. He laid out his initial thoughts on the global campaign plan that he is developing, and he was gaining everyone's input on that. So that has been going very well. Specifically to the agency under STRATCOM, the director of DTRA was dual-hatted as the director of STRATCOM's Center for Countering WMD. SOCOM is not following that organizational model, which is just fine. We still have most of the same people within the agency, so they're the SOCOM element with us, and that partnership is continuing, and they're really, if anything, it's grown even stronger with General Thomas's and his entire staff's active participation in that. So I will tell you, I think it is going exceptionally well.
Very good. Thank you. I have other questions that I'll submit for the record, and if you could respond to those in writing, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Langevin, and thank you so much to all of our witnesses, Dr. Hopkins, Mr. Verga, and Ms. Durand, for your expertise and testimony today. And no further questions from the committee members? I adjourn this hearing.